Hello and welcome to another edition of Ontology Talk. I'm Adam Pease, and today I wanted to continue with my series on taking items from the news and trying to formalize them. So recently I saw this rather shocking news report of an assault against a flight attendant. I thought I'd take maybe the less shocking portion of it, of just the definition of flight attendant. So let's see what a flight attendant might be. First we can check to see if SUMO already has this notion, and it appears not to. So we could also take the maybe unfortunately strongly gendered notion of stewardess or steward, and let's see what we have for that. So we have the linguistic element stewardess in WordNet, and it maps to a female in some kind of a service position, but it's a little bit non-specific. Because, let's say, a woman steward on an airplane. So we really can be a bit more specific than that. Let's just double check steward as well. This has many different definitions, but here, yes, an attendant on an airplane. So then choose the masculine gendered version as the neutral one. Just an unfortunate fact of English, maybe. So it's a position. That's also really insufficient. So let's try to go ahead and define what do we mean by steward or stewardess. So, or steward independent of, let's take that as the gender neutral version. So a steward is going to be a position. Let's see. So service position. That sounds like a good choice. So it is a skilled occupation. Now, of course, stewards and stewardesses also have, as they often say during your initial announcements on the plane, they're here for your comfort, primarily for your safety. So it's not really fair to call it entirely a service position, so we may want to have some multiple inheritance. That is one of their jobs, but they have several. Also, let's start with service positions. So let's give it steward. So steward is the gender neutral version, is a service position. Let's see if we have something like safety officer so that we can inherit something there and not have to talk about that or define that. Safety person, probably not. Safety device. Okay, yeah, so we don't seem to have any sort of notion of a safety official. That would maybe be a better name for it. So let's, and do we have the notion, we have notion of safety device. Let's look at that for some inspiration, maybe about what other terms help us define this notion of safety. So a safety device is designed to prevent or lessen likelihood of injuring to a human. So we really want to have an equivalent definition of safety personnel, safety official, that can do the same thing. So let's try to create that as well. So let's say subclass safety position, right? Because it's going to be a position. Occupations, maybe a key point if you haven't watched a lot of my other videos. In SUMO, we make clear to make a distinction between the sort of inherent nature of an entity versus some sort of transient relationship, right? So a flight steward or stewardess could be in that role while he or she is flying and at work. In off hours be a musician or a gardener or a stockbroker or some other kind of thing, or a parent, right? It's not being a flight attendant is not something fundamental and invariant, right? When they stop, when they retire, they quit, they take some time off, they haven't ceased to exist. They've just ceased to have that attribute of being a steward or flight attendant of some sort. All right, so it's let's say a safety position is going to be some kind of a skilled occupation. Let's double check that to make sure that I've got it right. Skilled occupation. See what that is. Okay, any position requires learning a set of skills, so that's pretty broad, so that should cover it. And let's go back to safety device, and let's see if we can do some copy and modify from this axiom and change it to be a person as well as a device. So notice here how we started off trying to represent the notion of a flight steward, but we very quickly deviated or realized that we need to define a supporting term, which is the notion of a safety position, because all we had was this service position. That's clearly insufficient really to define the nature of the job here. So let's change this axiom to be safety position. So the purpose of a safety position is that so this is an attribute, of course. So it's the attribute of a human, and so then we really have to contextualize it in time and say that it holds during a time t that this individual has an attribute of holding a safety position. Then we can also say, we must say really to contextualize it, that it holds during the same period t that this same person, represented by variable x, has the purpose that there exists some process and some human, and instead of being an instrument, we're not talking about a device now, we're talking about a human being. So we want to say that the agent of this process is going to prevent some injuring. Let's see, we've got the further t, so let's make this t2 to make it distinct. So it holds during this t2 that, it prevents the case of, and let me take a moment now to talk about kappa fun again, if you haven't seen my other videos. So this is a class forming operator. It sort of forms a class on the fly, because it doesn't always make sense to define sort of very contextually specific types of things. But in this case, we want to talk about the class of processes that prevent the injuring of a human. Okay, so it's going to hold during this period that if there's an injuring that takes place, it's not having the particular individual being protected as a patient of the event. So just because there's a safety position doesn't mean that the person in that position can necessarily prevent all injuries, and all injuries to people that he or she doesn't have sort of charge or responsibility over. But it's designed such that there be some process that would prevent some injurings. Right, so P, this safety, this process, this unnamed process that's being governed or enacted by the person holding the safety position during time T, the thing being prevented is an injuring in which there's this particular human is the injurer, the injured party. Okay. So I think this is reasonable for the notion of safety position. Now let's go backfill some of the additional information. So again, disclaimer here, this is just a sketch. I'm doing this on the fly. I think it's pretty good so far, but there could still be problems. It's going to take a little bit more thought. It's not something necessarily you can do 100% on the fly. Want to come back, maybe have somebody else take a look at it if it's something complicated. And this is a fairly complicated axiom. But let's just say for now that, so this safety position defined in English language is that it's a skilled occupation. Occupation occupation where the purpose of the job is to prevent injury, and we can link these things in the comments. That's what these special characters are about. It gives you a hyperlink. It's kind of a convenient shorthand in the comments to give you a pointer quickly to the full definitions in the browser. Browser knows how to parse these things. So prevent injuring to another human. Yeah, and so maybe there's an additional thing that we should say here, that it should prevent injuries to, well, can a safety position also be something where you prevent injury to yourself? Presumably, you also, if you're the safety officer, you don't want to injure yourself. So maybe that's good. I was thinking we might need to differentiate the agent in the safety position versus the human that is the object of the preventing injury action. But it could be one and the same. So let's stick with that for now. We're also going to create a term format. So this is the pretty print form of the term. So the term format in the English language of safety position will simply be safety position. Okay, so now that we've got safety position, so let's pull this down, this definition of steward, because it's going to depend upon a safety position. So, oops. So it is a service position. Let's copy this, and I'll make it easier to just say that indeed it is also a safety position. And let's also say that this job has the intention of being performed at least partly on a plane. Now let's see. So is a steward or stewardess really performing a steward or stewardess duty if they're not on the plane? I mean, sometimes I guess they double as gate agents. Maybe that's something that I would need to check on what's customary. But let's just say that this position, this occupation, has its purpose of being done on the plane. So we can say that if it holds during a certain period that this person is, and let's see, so this is going to be actually not subclass, it's going to be an instance of generically a safety service position and a safety position, and we don't want to say safety position. Let me change that. Okay, so, and let's change this to steward. Okay, so if during some period some person is holding the position, the attribute of being a steward, then it also holds during that position that the given individual is located on a plane. So let's say there exists some P, and that instance P plane, I think it's probably airplane, but let's double check that. Airplane, okay, good, that's what we want. So instance P, airplane, okay, and located P on the plane. Now, what else can we say? Of course, there are other safety officials on a plane, and you could say that certainly the goal of the pilot, the purpose of the pilot also is to prevent injury to the passengers, and may be called upon to do that specifically during some kind of malfunction. So not only is he not supposed to intentionally cause injury to the passengers, obviously, but if something else happens outside of his or her direct control, then he or she also has to prevent injury. How is that different from a steward? Well, the steward is not flying the plane. So we might also say that, during the course of one's duties as a steward that there exists a plane, and it is not the case that there exists a G, which is I'm going to define as a guiding. Now, guiding the right thing, I'll check on that in a moment. We can always replace it. Where the agent of the guiding is going to be X, the steward, and the instrument in the guiding is going to be the plane. So that doesn't exist. There exists an airplane, and there isn't a guiding that the steward is doing. Now, of course, let's see. Then there's also the issue of, well, as we've seen in enough disaster movies over the years, occasionally the steward might be called on to actually fly the airplane. Say the pilot's incapacitated. Maybe the control tower talks the steward and stewardess in to flying the plane. Does that person cease to be a steward? Well, they're not really performing their job necessarily as steward at a time. So I think you could make that case. But you could also think of creating another rule that says that the purpose, all right, wrap this whole thing in, well, and let's go do that. Let's just say that the purpose of this, well, okay, this is also interesting. So the purpose of this individual, is it has purpose for agent, I think might be the better thing. Let's go check on that, because that's a little more specific. It's not like the individual necessarily has the purpose that they never fly. I mean, if they are called on to, then they might have to fly. But purpose for agent. There's a physical, so that's an object, and then there's the agent itself. And so in this case, the purpose of the agent is that they not necessarily fly the plane, and they won't necessarily cease to be a steward if they go about doing that. So let's just contextualize this a little more. That has purpose for agent. Let's find the right place in our hierarchy here. Okay, so that parentheses is the end of the has purpose for agent. In this case, we can say, it's actually the next rule that we were just working on here. So has purpose for agent. Let's fix that one up here. This is actually has purpose. Not sure about that. Have to think a little bit more about this, but let's do this for now, just so you can see what the thought process is and how we encode it. So there we are, holds during. So we're going to put has purpose for agent, should go here, and then we need one more parentheses to finish balancing. All right, so let's call that done for now. So we've taken a look at, let's see, we'll also need to do documentation or term format, but I think this video is getting a little long already. And these axioms are fairly complex, so they're necessarily higher order axioms. In fact, they're heavily higher order. They include temporal restrictions, a purpose or teleological restriction. That includes the notion of preventing something, which is itself a higher order relation, and then a class forming operator, then wrapped around additionally a temporal expression, a temporal qualification, temporal logic. So these are pretty tough axioms, and I don't trust myself to write them completely right on the fly, but hopefully you've got an idea of what the sketch of this looks like and all the things that we're considering in order to come up with what's hopefully eventually going to be a good definition for flight attendant. It's not as simple as saying, flight attendant is an occupation. Great. that doesn't really tell you very much, and it doesn't give the computer a good idea of what a flight attendant is, even if you then sort of define it in English, which of course the computer can't read. You've got to be able to define this stuff formally in a computerized language for the software to share the understanding, to the extent of that in big scare quotes, understanding that the human being might have about this. So to be able to respond to questions or derive answers that obey these same restrictions or constraints about the real world with regard to this particular topic or concept. All right, so I hope this has been helpful, and thanks for watching.